Welcome to Embargoed, intelligent talk about sanctions, export controls, and all things international trade, for trade nerds and normal human beings alike. I'm one of your hosts, Tim O'Toole, and with me today is my co-host, Melissa Burgess. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you, Tim.
And we're very excited today to have a friend and very knowledgeable BIS person today, Don Pearce. Don, welcome.
Thank you so much. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
It's great to hear that. Always good to hear that, and thank you for listening. So we wanted to have you on the podcast today because we wanted to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is BIS enforcement. And it is I think we'll have you go through the history of it, but my sense is that BIS enforcement has become more important than ever. It is a big linchpin of the Russian sanctions program at this point, and I think it is a very timely topic. And in fact, just before we started to record, we were talking about the fact that your friends at BIS were kind enough to put out another version of Don't Let This Happen to You, just in time for us to talk about it during the recording. So we should have a lot to talk about.
Just in time for the holidays.
Exactly.
Get 'em for stocking stuff.
Yes. You can wrap that up and send it to all your friends. All right. Well, why don't we start a little bit, Don, by your background, and tell us a little bit about kind of how you came to BIS and the role of BIS agents in enforcement actions.
Sure. So I started with BIS in 1997. Just to kind of, for the younger listeners, this was as Hong Kong was returning to Chinese rule. And I had been a customs inspector prior to that. I had worked on the outbound enforcement unit, which was a year old at that time. Prior to that, there were two inspectors that were assigned to do outbound investigations or outbound inspections at JFK Airport. Two inspectors and two clerks. For a while, before I was an inspector, I was one of those clerks. So that's how the kind of export control bug bit me was, in fact, it was my first clerical assignment. I was an 18-year-old kid. It was a GS1 Step 1. And one of the first things I did was they took me on a little ride-along out to the Iraq Air and Kuwait Air warehouses at JFK Airport to seal them up because Iraq had invaded Kuwait. That's how old I am. So
that is one introduction.
Yeah. So
wow.
I've been doing this for a while.
This is good. I hope we reserved a lot of time with Matt for the podcast because I didn't think we were going to be starting in 1989.
Well, technically, going all the way back to 88. Yeah, I started my government career on August 29th, 1988, and
wow.
The first award I ever got from the Customs Service in the citation, my supervisor had written that his friends at Burger King make more money. Which was true, but I was accruing annual leave. I don't know what a GS1 makes now, but it's still not enough to live on, especially here.
So, what sorts of things was BIS doing back in the late 80s?
So, as I came in at a point where the agency was moving from, I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 90 special agents nationwide to about 110. There was a big hiring push. The current director of the Office of Export Enforcement, John Sonderman, we went through basic school together. We were in the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center Academy class together. A lot of the folks I was kind of one of the first to retire. I got my 20 years in as a criminal investigator, and I'd done all the fun stuff. So I punched out on February 29th of 2020. For those of you keeping score, that was Leap Day. And OPM still managed to get everything processed. Thank you so much. Most importantly, nobody said February 29th, that can't exist.
That can't possibly. That's right. Well, does that mean you only get a check once every 4 years, or is
every 4 years? No, I still say when I talk about BIS, I still say we instead of they because it's only been like a year ago. Really, it was 4.
That's true. All right. Well, so it sounds like from those humble beginnings, you kind of went on to have a pretty long career at BIS, and I'm guessing that you saw a lot of changes in the role of the agency. So, why don't you talk a little bit about what? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it definitely changed. Like the type of investigation changed significantly while I was at BIS. When I rolled in, it was still the Bureau of Export Administration, for those of you who remember that. And no one ever referred to us by BXA agent. It was always OEE agent, Office of Export Enforcement. Because in the early days, the agents and everyone else in at the time BXA didn't really get along. They kind of saw themselves, I think, at loggerheads at points, and some of it is just the team rivalry. You still see licensing officers teasing agents and calling us knuckle draggers, and we teasing them and calling them Poindexters and things like that. But I think back then the two sides of BIS did not communicate as well as they do today. And that is a relationship that grew as I was there, seeing, and I was lucky. I kind of had a front row seat to a lot of the bigger changes in the last few years between my role as the Regional Export Control Officer in Singapore and also my headquarters assignment, my last assignment, where I was in the Liaison and Interdiction Unit, but also handled some policy-related issues as a subject matter expert. So I got to watch this. It all started with export control reform. I think a lot of the cooperatives, like everybody says that September 11th, 2001 was the day that the agencies started talking to one another. I would say that the beginning of the conversation between BIS, between EA, Export Administration, and EE, Export Enforcement, was export control reform. I think everyone started to get that almost kumbaya feeling, I think.
And was that kind of along the lines of when E2C2 started to build up?
Oh, thanks for reminding me. Longest 180 days of my career was when I had to be the deputy director at E2C2. And right, don't get me wrong. E2C2 is a great organization when they do what they're supposed to be doing, which is to deconflict investigations between the agencies that have export control related responsibilities. Because the last thing you want is, well, first of all, duplication of effort. Let's face it. If you've got three agencies looking at the same target, they're going to be a lot more effective if all three agencies are working together. BIS is always going to be a smaller dog in that fight. We have, I always used to joke around that we were a one-trick pony, but we had one hell of a trick, because we're also the only ones that can do the administrative enforcement sides of these cases. So bringing a BIS agent onto your FBI counterintelligence investigation that happens to have an export control angle, or your HSI smuggling case that happens to have an export control angle, is a real benefit. When E2C2 can make those connections and they can start building joint cases together, that's where the real value is.
Yeah, and I mean, that was from the outside, that was kind of one of the things that we always noticed, was that it didn't seem, back in the day, not as much recently, like the agencies were really talking to each other. And so you'd have HSI that was doing kind of what seemed to be the same investigation as BIS, and then the FBI either was or wasn't in the loop, but it didn't seem like there was that much coordination. I mean, but when were you at E2C2?
I would have been 2016, 2017, there, right there around, yeah. And
it's that sounds like it was getting better by that point. I mean,
it was, and I have to admit, I joke a lot at the expense of my friends, the agents over at the FBI and HSI, and that's, again, friendly rivalry. We tease because we love, but back when I was a rookie agent in New York, people didn't want to do joint investigations. In some cases, you were kind of dissuaded from bringing someone on. It was like, oh, you can't do this by yourself. You need help. And I think as these investigations changed, I mean, the focus of the agency in the 80s was obviously a lot more focused. I mean, is the COCOM era, you're talking about preventing goods and technology from going to the Soviet Union and satellite states. So a much more focused, again, one-trick pony. If you really want to say it's one trick, it was really, that was it. The fall of the Soviet Union really brought this focus of just having one major target. It basically blew that out of the water.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get to it in more detail, but when I was reading through This Could Happen to You, one of the things that, that the trends that they note was that back in the day, you had kind of the focus on state action. And then post 2001, the focus was on kind of non-state terrorist actors, but that we've kind of come full circle now, and some of the same folks that would have been on the Don't Happen to You list in the 1990s, if there had been one, may be at the top of the charts again today.
And it's funny because if you look at it, it feels like it's flipped slightly, like it's slightly, the polarization is slightly different. While Russia is a serious concern, it's not as much of a concern as China. Whereas back in the 80s,
yep,
China wasn't so much of a concern. It was more the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has been a big flip. But why don't you talk a little bit, before we start talking about particular countries and kind of enforcement actions, tell us a little bit about some of the tasks that were involved in your role. And I know that Melissa and I have talked a lot about the outreach, and so I know that is part of the role of a BIS special agent, but kind of just give us what you were focused on when you were kind of in that position.
So again, and this focus has changed slightly over the years too. So when I first got to BIS, your goal was to make one good criminal case a year, and supplement that with some administrative actions, and that's how you were rated. If you didn't have a good criminal case one year, you're going to have a problem. You weren't going to get that 5 out of 5 rating that year. If you did, you could kind of put your feet up, and then you could go out and do your outreaches, because those are kind of fun, right? It's just going and talking to people. You had to do a set number of outreaches a year. It depended on how long you were on the job. When you were new, you did a lot more outreach than you did when you were more experienced, because they wanted you to get out and talk to people and make the connections that were going to help you to make that one big criminal case a year. You can't do it by yourself. You need people to guide you. You need people that are your eyes and ears in the industry. But more importantly, you also need to understand how this industry works.
And was outreach like a real outreach most of the time, or was it kind of, we think there might be an issue here, but we're just going to show up and do outreach?
All right, so I make this joke all the time. Tim's heard it like 7 times when we teach together. It's the if the outreach happens at between like 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. on a Friday, and it's a solo agent, it takes about 45 minutes. Congratulations, you just got yourself a drive-by. Let's just get you out of the office a little early, start your Federal Friday. And I tease about that, but even that outreach is a good outreach, because it's usually with someone you haven't spoken to before. It's trying to fly the flag, as well as making sure that there's a person on the other end of a phone number that they can call when they have a question or they have a red flag that they can't clear. If it's Monday morning and it's 9 o'clock in the morning, or whenever your office just opens, and there's 3 agents there, one from BIS, one from HSI, one from the FBI, and they just happen to be in the neighborhood at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, you're probably a target, or at least you're really close to one. And I always used to use that line too. Of, I was just in the neighborhood, and no one ever believed it. They don't pull names out of hats if it's something serious. And you'll know if it's something serious pretty quickly. You'll know even faster if you have a good relationship with an agent, because that agent will call you and say, hey, listen, somebody's got your stuff and we need to figure out how this happened. There's a lot of proactive investigative work that can happen if you have a good relationship with an agent. And aiding I won't even say aiding, right? If you care about your company, if you care about your company's reputation, those are all fine reasons to make sure that you have a good relationship with your BIS agent. But at the end of the day, this mission is about protecting you, your family, your country, and frankly, the world in some cases. So, that's really the reason people are out here doing this job. I mean, we're not doing it to get rich.
Good thing, right?
Yeah, right. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to be hustling.
Well, but building off your, happen to be in the neighborhood comment versus it's 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, for industry on the receiving end of that visit, especially, say, a smaller company who hasn't dealt with a special agent before, what are not necessarily tricks, but tips or things that they should be keeping in mind of basically understanding what you might be there to do, to learn, and how to react? For instance, I'm sure you encountered scenarios where you show up unannounced and no one knows who to call within the company. Maybe they know enough to call an export compliance person if they have one. Maybe they know enough to call the president. Maybe they don't know. And then you're shuffled into a conference room and you sit there and wait. So,
oh yeah, that happens.
Industry,
that definitely happens.
How do you avoid unnecessary friction by having made a special agent wait for 45 minutes while everybody showed up to the office or figured out who was supposed to talk to you?
Well, first of all, I mean, if there isn't already a plan at your organization for what to do when a government agent shows up, we're recording this on a Friday. I'd say maybe first thing Monday morning, you want to book some time that week with with the person who's your gatekeeper and maybe your supervisors, and come up with a plan for such. And not just for BIS. Yep. And anytime you have a law enforcement officer visiting, there should be a protocol. And I will, all the agents who are watching or listening now are going to be, pulling their hair out when I say this. Make them wait. Get the right person. It's better for them. It's better for you. There were several times where I would show up and they would throw me in a room with somebody who had no idea what I was looking for or how to get the information that I needed. And that doesn't help anyone.
Exactly.
Whereas turning around and saying, listen, our policy is that we need to get somebody from the counsel's office to sit in on this. And, we'd like to help you, but the person that really knows this isn't available today. Can we make an appointment? Can you show up later? Is there some happy middle ground that we can find to make sure that you get the information that you need, but that we do it through our own policies and protocols? And, most agents are going to not have a problem with that.
Yep. I've definitely encountered scenarios before where everybody thought they knew who was in charge of those types of aspects. But then again, when someone from the government showed up, they didn't even know to ask, is it a special agent or just someone on the admin side, the regulatory side?
Did you get a name? Did you get a card?
See, now that's the trick with BIS, is that the agent and the admin side are the same person.
Yes, which does make it a little more difficult to read the tea leaves there. But
yeah, I can tell you from the other side of this. So what'll happen is the agent will show up, and in the clients that have kind of a plan and a whole process, you'll get a report, you'll know who the agent was, and they'll probably have known beforehand who the agent was because they've worked with the agent before. And then there's some other clients where, they'll call you like 3 weeks later, and they'll call you because they got a subpoena, and they're like, yeah, we talked to this guy. I don't remember who it was, and was it a law enforcement? Not sure. They were the SIB or like, I don't know, commerce or something. And so you do see from the other side that some clients have it together, and other clients they've got opportunity challenges.
I once went into a company and I gave them my business card. I said I was a special agent with the Department of Commerce. And the secretary duly got on the intercom line to her boss and said, there's a guy here from the Chamber of Commerce. And I kind of laughed. I let it go. The guy comes out, greets me, shakes my hand. I walk in. I'm handing him a business card. And as I'm sitting down, I unbutton my suit coat, and my gun shows slightly. And he goes, if you're with the Chamber of Commerce, why do you have a gun? Well, I'm not with the Chamber of Commerce. I'm with the Department of Commerce. And I just handed you a card with a badge on it. It came with the handcuffs and the badge. It's a set.
Yeah.
I didn't really.
Let me go back. Let me go back and get somebody else to meet with you, since we were going to bring you in the salespeople to tell you all about the things we'd like the Chamber of Commerce to do for us.
Yeah. It was even better overseas doing end-use checks. Oftentimes our export control, or their export control officers, are assigned to the commercial section. And normally the job of the commercial section is to increase U.S. exports, go out and find new clients for American exporters. So half the time I'd show up and, I'd hand them my business card, and they'd see that it was from the commercial section, and they'd think that I was there to sell them something. And it's great. As long as they end up, as long as we can end up completing the end-use check, I don't care why you think I'm there. But it was, and oftentimes they were a little disappointed to find out that I didn't have like a string of American clients ready to go to provide them what they needed. I was like, I'm going to have to get somebody who knows that stuff. I'm just the cop.
So you were out in Singapore.
That's right.
And then you were also kind of at E2C2.
And prior to that, I was the export control attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow from 2004 to 2007. Oh, wow. When we were kind of sort of friends, but not really.
Yeah, well, so it looks like you're kind of on the list of greatest hit countries that are still listed in.
Yeah, I'm guessing I regret that I'll probably never see the place again, because I really liked it. My little Christmas tree back there is from Moscow. It's from a company called Panatest that did end-use checks at several times, and
it's a good thing you got it in the country before 2022, or else.
That's right. No problem. I'm just glad it was worth less than $20, so I could keep it.
So in any of those roles, did you work on voluntary disclosures? I know that agents do now. Absolutely. Like they get assigned, but so you were doing the same thing. I mean, tell us Absolutely. A little bit about how that process would work.
As a rookie agent, the first thing you get to work on are voluntary self-disclosures, because 9 times out of 10, a company has done a pretty good little investigation for you that you can then learn from. And it teaches you the kind of the rote of the job, the things that you are going to have to show in a case report for an administrative enforcement action. And the first mistake that rookie agents make is they think that because their job title is criminal investigator, that everything's a crime. And in most cases at BIS, not only is it not a crime because you don't have the mens rea, it's sometimes not even a violation. It's people being overly cautious in voluntary self-disclosures, or finding a violation that is just so minor that your boss tells you to send them no action letter and be done with it, or a warning letter and be done with it. And once you've become a journeyman agent when you get to a point where you can look at a voluntary self-disclosure and know, I can close this in 10 minutes, or it's going to take me a couple of weeks, or I might need to schedule some time with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And that last one is very rare. I think it happened once in my career, and there are probably agents that never happened to.
It sounds like that what you were doing on your own has kind of worked its way into policy at this point, because I mean, I don't know if you've seen kind of some of the recent changes to the policies that BIS has with respect to voluntary disclosures, but this triaging is a big part of it, I think, which is trying to sort out kind of the this is not really worth our time type cases to the we need to devote some resources to this because this is serious. I mean, any thoughts on those recent changes?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's good if companies have an established compliance program and they are familiar with the regulations and can do that triage themselves and fast track. That's great. Mm-hmm. My only concern, and it's a concern that's probably comes out of my past of what it was like to be an export enforcement agent when no one knew what you were, is companies that don't have that experience, where it is their first time looking at something like this and deciding just to go with the path of least resistance, and don't realize that what they're basically doing is saying, yeah, no, there's nothing here, when there's a giant fire burning behind them that some agent is going to take a look at and go, oh no, there is something here. And not to make this a commercial for folks like me that are doing the consulting and helping companies to navigate these issues. There really is a need for that level of specialist knowledge in companies that are going to be making these voluntary disclosures. And if they don't have it in-house, they really should be getting it from some outside contractor or from a law firm.
Well, on the level of shameless PR, one of the things that I should have done when I introduced you, Don, but didn't, was point out, where you're working at Torres Trade Advisory now. You're a senior advisor. You're also, we teach together at the Export Compliance Training Institute. Kind of, in terms of consultants, if you're going to a consultant, Don obviously has all of the background. So why don't you just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in that capacity?
Yeah, so I partnered up with Torres Trade Advisory. It is the advisory arm of Torres Trade Law. It's a boutique firm that focuses on international trade and national security issues. And I've been very happy in that a good chunk of my job has been providing training to clients on how to do good due diligence, on how to use the power of the internet and what is often referred to as open source intelligence techniques to do a good deep dive on a potential client or on parties to a particular transaction to make sure you really do know who you're doing business with. And that's probably my favorite part of this job. I also kind of revisit my role as an investigator every once in a while, taking a look at the transactions that perhaps will be voluntarily self-disclosed to the U.S. government, or in some cases helping companies to do internal investigations as part of a voluntary self-disclosure or as part of a consent agreement. So these are, and that's actually, again, I can't believe they pay me to do this stuff. I hope Olga's not listening right now. It's kind of the things that I kind of pride myself on are, I grew up reading a lot of Sherlock Holmes, and every so often there will be a case laid out in front of me, and it just the violations just stand out like blinking red lights, and no one else has spotted it. And it's only because I kind of love this stuff. It's fascinating to me. It's this niche little area of law that up until after I retired, of course, I would go to a cocktail party or a birthday party or something, and they'd ask what I meet somebody new, and they'd ask what I do for a living. Oh, I'm special agent in the Office of Export Enforcement. Oh, that sounds nice. What does that mean? Whereas now it's like, oh, I'm a retired agent. I used to work for the Bureau of Industry and Security. Oh, the sanctions people! Holy cow! What's going on? What's the semiconductors? The Russia sanctions are fascinating. Did you hear about that guy in Brooklyn? Like, yeah, I know those guys.
But on that topic of open source, clearly over your career, what's been available has, to the average, say, compliance person trying to do this research, has changed dramatically. So do you see any particular trends or kind of learning instances there where, we can look at, say, what someone might have done in the 90s, and which was clearly sufficient, a correct risk-based approach in the 90s and the early 2000s, and now, based off some of the things BIS has dropped, say, at the update conference, the level of that you're being held to behind the scenes, you may not know it, is just, far beyond what you might imagine in terms of even going to Google Maps and looking at Street View and looking at what's across the street and things like that you can't pull out of, a listing on the entity list just between the four corners of that list.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I often start my classes on OSINT by saying things like, you have at your fingertips access to satellite imagery that when I was a rookie, I would have needed permission to get. And now you can go and look at that imagery on your smartphone while you stand there in front of your office or in front of the place that's supposed to be there. We live in an amazing age for information, and this isn't something you're going to do on every client. I get that. Nobody has that kind of time. Even if you have a defined unit for export compliance, doing a deep dive on every potential topic there's just no way. You'd never be able to do the rest of your job.
Yep.
But having that ability to do this when you do have a red flag does sort of up the ante when it comes to what the government is going to expect you to do. I will say on the other side of that coin is good front companies are fooling the government 24/7. So it's not something where if we're being honest, you can just say that, well, the companies all have to be able to do all of this. Sometimes they can't. I do like how much more cooperative BIS is now as far as that is concerned. I mean, I felt like the first great leap in this is the is informed letter. And when I was in Singapore, I got to deliver an is informed letter to a company that they weren't real happy to receive it. I'll tell you that much. That was supporting at that point it was those changes in I believe it was 2014 that restricted support to Arctic and deep water exploration by Russia, and this was a derrick or something that had been a seagoing derrick that was built in like 1979 in the United States, and is EAR 99, and all of a sudden this joker from the embassy is showing up and telling me we have to turn this around and then wait and see if we can get a license for it. And there's a presumption of denial for that license, and that was their introduction to U.S. export controls. I'm going to say I walked out of that office without turning my back. They were not happy.
Sure they weren't.
But the ability now, one of the things they kind of pushed back on was, well, we don't even know where this thing is. And I'm like, well, funny you should ask, because I've got it right here on my phone.
Yeah.
Because again, something that we didn't have when I was a rookie agent is I can go and I can see the location of a ship or an aircraft in real time. And you can too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think to Melissa's point, I mean, that's probably one reason that expectations have changed so much is that what is available to companies and how hard it is to get has really morphed over the years to where you need to hire somebody to go out and do all the work now that you can do in 5 minutes on the Google.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, one of the slides, I have this meme that I use on one of my slides, and it's a bell curve, and in the at each end of the bell curve, one end there's a drawing of kind of a cartoony stupid person, and it says it's just fancy Googling. And in the middle of the bell curve is the definition of open source intelligence. Then on the other side is the really smart looking guy, and it says it's just fancy Googling. Yeah. And I love it because it's true. It really is. I mean, if you just incorporate some Booleans and you spend a little bit of time and you learn the magic secret that many of the algorithms are written so that the most relevant and best responses to your query are in the first 4 pages. So you don't have to go to page 72. You're not going to find what you're looking for there. You have that freedom to keep your search concise and take a look at what's out there. The world's your oyster.
But on that topic, kind of trending down the what you should be looking at and how you're looking at it route. So one of the most recent enforcement actions that BIS announced, one of the civil, administrative settlements, was essentially the company had the data, but where that data was sitting wasn't quite right. So that they had a ship to address, they had a sell to address, and they were screening every name in every field that that ship to and that sell to field. They just happened to put the same name in both those fields, and the listed entity was that next level down and probably, address line 1. That's been a problem for many, many companies. And I feel like often when you're coming in for some kind of audit, for, an investigation, once someone suspects a violation, there's often that kind of tension and pushback, but we screen everybody. But we, we take all the measures, and then people like us say, but really, let's stop and check. You screen everybody, but are you putting the right data in so that the right data is getting screened? And in this case, it was a very awkward situation for the company, because for one customer, they were screening it and they knew they had to stop and get a license. For the other customer, they weren't getting screening that exact same name, and they weren't getting the license, and they were just shipping. And, the potential penalties there, I think, could have been nearly like 27 million. Luckily for them, they only had to pay about 500,000. But still, on the one side, they were doing it right. On the other side, a complete failure. And
I can tell a war story from my days in the field in New York. We had a case where we already knew that the item in question, a laser, had been transferred from Dubai to Iran, and I was when we started. One of the ways we try to put people at ease is we like to use humor. BIS agents are a bunch of really funny people. I'd like to think myself included.
I think that's fair, Don.
Asking about, thank you. Thank you. There's fishing for that compliment. We started that interview, and I said, tip the waiters, try the veal. There's an issue with this laser that you sent. And the first thing, I have to ask you a question about this laser. Is it shark mountable? And for those of you who've seen the Austin Powers films, and one of the people, there are 2 gentlemen we were talking to, one of them had, and he laughed, and the other one just looked at me like I was crazy. And then he explained the movie, and this was probably right around the time that the movie had just been out in the theaters, so it was a light, a little heart, a levity moment, in this very serious
timely
interview.
Joke then too.
It was. That's how old I am. That could be timely. And the problem was I already knew this thing was in Iran, and we'd sent the export control officer in Abu Dhabi down to Dubai to find out, and we were sitting in the parking lot when that cable came through, so we already knew we had them. But we did the interview the way we would have done any other interview, which is, establish the bona fides of the transaction. When we got to the point where it turns out that the original buyer had changed twice. The locations had changed. It was a circuitous route that was selected. And the best part was I asked them how they got paid. They said they got paid by a wire. So I asked for the copy of the wire. And they, went and dutifully pulled out a copy of the wire. And I look at the payer information, and it says Tehrani Express. Like,
no clue what country that's from.
I elbow my partner, who's now the special in charge in the New York field office, Jonathan Carson. I elbow him and I show him, and he just kind of rolls his eyes. I pass it back over, and I say, "Tell me who the payer was there." And you see the guy pick this and he goes white. I thought he was going to have a heart attack. Now, this was a case that was closed with an administrative enforcement action. Nobody went to jail. Nobody, this was obviously a company that was trying to unload an item and took the best deal they could find and didn't want to ask a lot of questions. That's a really bad business strategy, by the way.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I think it's even worse than it would have been then, because I think with the amount of information now available to a company to do that kind of due diligence, missing something like that is probably going to get you on that aggravating factor list a little bit higher.
But even with all that information available, it means, it's the escalation of they get smarter, you have to get smarter, and so on. So one of the criminal cases that I think newly entered, the "Don't let this happen to you," it was a pre-2022 Russian diversion case, and it looks like they'd gone to great lengths, including coming to the factory in the U.S. to say, we're the people buying it, we're the people who are the real end users. And, of course, none of that was true. And this case, it was like a jig grinder, I believe, that it didn't require a license for Estonia or Latvia, which were where it was supposedly going. Of course, did even then to Russia. But, if you're the manufacturer, they've come in person. You've seen them. They're real. They exist. They've showed you information about their company. Unless they kind of had a tell that you managed to read while there, that's a case that I think it would have been very hard without more facts. It would have been very hard to guess that what they really were up to was this very complicated scheme to get this thing all the way to Russia.
And yes,
I think for most people that.
I think on the other end of that is there's two things that about this case that I'd like to highlight with things from my own casework in the past. So first, the fact that someone shows up to your office and shows up with documentation, that's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I like that. It does show a commitment to being open and transparent. The problem is, people lie, as we see in this case.
Exactly.
And just taking them at face value is a problem. Now, I did an end use check while I was in Singapore for it was a pre-license check where there were suspicions about the ultimate end use because the order for this item was coming into it was showing Singapore, but the ultimate end user was a Chinese company. And I was sent out to do this pre-license check, and I showed up at this, company's location, which was in an office about the size of a large walk-in closet, and it had a single table with a laptop computer and a hardwired telephone and a fax machine that was not plugged into anything, kind of sitting there with a cable sitting on top of it, and had a paper sign on the door with the name of the company. And then they showed us computer-generated drawings of the facility that these items were going to be shipped to, and that they were going to be used to make a component for the Chinese high-speed rail network. And I asked a couple of questions about this facility, like is this a facility for ants? Because it looked like a model. It didn't look like an actual photograph. So, well, no, these are just computerized photographs. And it's like, well, why don't you have a real photograph? Well, that's what they sent us. Oh, so have you been
Thought it
to
would
this?
be more
Oh,
impressive.
yes, many times. You never took a selfie? I mean, come on. Nowadays, there's a red flag right there. You never took a selfie in front of your own company? Come on. But the other side of that, the United States is lucky. U.S. export control officers in embassies in key regions of the world who have regional responsibility and can travel to places to go and knock on doors and meet people and see the facility. There were several end-use checks that I did, both in Russia and in Singapore, where I showed up to the address that was listed, and there was nothing there. It was an empty office. Yeah. Or it was my favorite was I brought my friends from HSI and the FBI at Post along with me, and we all tromped up there to go do this end-use check, and we're looking through the window, and you could see like a layer of dust on everything. There's some old mechanical equipment in there, but it obviously had not been used in years. And we stopped off at the management office on the way out and asked, asked about that area. And we didn't say who we were. We just kind of walked in and said, hey, I just got a couple of questions about 406 up there. It's like, oh yeah, you guys interested? We've been trying to get that moved, but you'll have to clean it out yourselves. I'm like, thank you very much. No, we're not interested. We just wanted to know who was there.
Yep.
So actually, your description reminds me. I was talking to a German lawyer once, and it's a little bit off tangent because it is the sanctions context. But we were talking about the blocking statute in Germany, and they wanted to file a license application to violate the blocking statute, and they went to the German agency that was responsible for administering the blocking statute, and the offices looked like the ones that you described, like an unplugged fax machine, dust all. So, and ultimately, once they tracked somebody down, and it took weeks because they were not in that office, even though that was the listed office, they were told, why would you want to file a license application? Well, why don't you just do what everybody else does and cancel the contract and tell them that it was for a business reason and not for sanctions. So sometimes you even have government front offices apparently.
And I have to say, don't swing by a government office on Friday at 3:00 and expect anything to get done. I'm not judging. In fact, I'm just as guilty as everyone else.
One of the things about walking through some of these enforcement actions is it does seem to me like they do highlight issues that we see, and I'm sure you saw a lot. The first one that you guys talked about with the entity list entity. On the one hand, it sounds like their screening wasn't great because you got to have a human who actually knows what to input in order to screen, or else you're kind of in trouble. And then it also looks like, one of the recommendations from BIS and all the enforcement agencies now is that you have automation in your screening process. And if they'd had an automated block with the second transaction that this company was doing, it probably would have flagged at least some of the future transactions with the first one. So it seems like a lot of these enforcement actions, when you combine them with some of the compliance lessons, give you some good information about how you can wind up in don't let this happen to you if you don't pay attention to the compliance lessons.
Yeah. And also how much information you're collecting and screening. So now, with some of those changes to the entity list that are essentially address only changes, maybe before you kind of could quote unquote get away with only screening a name, but now you do really need to screen addresses, and which you should have been doing anyway.
Probably.
Yeah,
you never
can
let it
guess
be said
that a
that
Huawei
laziness,
entity is.
laziness is the enemy here, people.
Yes. Yeah.
But the other thing too is that a lot of these involve diversion. When you were in Singapore, my guess is that you kind of got familiar with some of the places that diversion went to. It sounds like from what you were talking about that China might have been a concern. Was Iran a concern while you were there?
Iran was a huge concern, and in fact, it was the I participated in a case. Actually, it was my second gold medal. Yes, I got two of them. The second gold medal was literally.
You should have warned them, Don. You should have warned them.
I should have. Yeah, I have when I wear my tuxedo, especially here in the DC area. If you go to a formal event, you'll see the military guys, and they all wear their little racks of mini medals on their tuxedos, and so I have my gold medal with gold star affixed for the second medal. That I wear, and it's a great conversation piece because people will come and they're like that, they're thinking they can do a little stolen valor action here. I'm like, no, it's a Commerce Department gold medal.
There you go.
And the case was a case called Coursing. What was happening was these electronic components, RF components, radio frequency modules. Basically, the thing that's in your garage door opener to open your garage door, but they're encrypted so that they only open your garage door and not someone else's. These are like slightly, higher speed, lower drag versions of this, but this was the commodity. It was being shipped to Singapore for a telecommunications project. The company called Coursing. They were transferring it to a company that was run by a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, who was then transferring them to places like Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur, where there were direct flights by Mahan Air that brought these back to Iran, where they were then put into knockdown kits for use as remote triggers for improvised explosive devices, and those knockdown kits were then sent to Iraq, where they were being used against U.S. and coalition forces. Wow. And the way this case got made was we're able to pull the serial number off of a couple of these things and then send BIS agents out to knock on the door at the companies that made them and say, hey, where'd you sell these? And luckily we were able to piece this case together. And we had 4 suspects in Singapore that Singapore Customs went out and arrested for us. 3 of them were successfully extradited to the United States. 2 of them immediately. 2 were released because of some technicalities. One of those 2 then did a business trip to Indonesia where they locked him up on the red notice and sent him to the United States. The 4th will never see Disneyland because if she leaves Singapore, there's a red notice for her. So, although I hear Belarus is beautiful this time of year, fine going there. So the
North Korea is nice as well.
Oh yeah, that's what I hear. That's what I hear. Good trade destination nowadays if you want to sell things to Russia. So the Iran side of this is something that's been there for years. And it's because in many cases, the bad guys, study the trends in shipping just as much as the good guys do. Only what they're looking for is they're looking for these efficiencies, not to be able to maximize their customer satisfaction and their bottom line. They're looking to find places where they can move things quickly. As kind of a sideline, while I was in Singapore, I had a portfolio called Save from Harm, which was where the commercial service was helping companies that were victims of frauds. And I worked closely with the Singapore police force to initiate basically a call-in system where American companies that had been victims of credit card fraud for items that were being sold as allegedly to Singaporean end users, well, those addresses, again, here's important to checking the address. Yep. The addresses were all freight forwarders. And what would happen is people would use a stolen credit card with the stolen credit card's name and that address of that freight forwarder and order a bunch of stuff. A lot of high-end bicycle parts. I was surprised at that. Like, $400 cranks and stuff like that. Going to an individual at a freight forwarder at Changi Airport, which, rang bells. And usually the bells rang really loud when the chargebacks came. But we had a very small window of opportunity here between the time that the company found out about the chargeback and the shipping time and the movement through Singapore. we would get about 300 or 400 of those a year, of those complaints. When we put this into action, though, we would send Singapore police officers out to the freight forwarders and basically ask them about these things. We actually had Singapore Customs help us in returning a container that had been shipped with stolen goods from Indonesia back to Singapore, and have those goods returned to the owners. Complaints went down from like 250 in, I think it was 20. I guess I got there 2010, so it was in like 2011 or 2012, to 4 in my last year. And it's because the bad guys caught on that this was not the place to run this scam anymore because people were looking.
So then they went to Hong Kong, I guess.
That's the ECO in Hong Kong's problem.
Exactly. All right. Well, we're coming on to an hour, so I guess we probably should wind this down. Any last lessons for folks who want to comply with the export control laws, but would do better if they knew the sorts of things that you've seen as a BIS special agent?
I'll say the first thing is don't panic. You might think something's wrong. You might think something is going to get you into trouble. Those are good feelings to have. The reason you have fear is to protect yourself. Ask the questions. Do the research. See if things make sense. And when they don't make sense, don't put the blinders on. If there's going to be 100 reasons why you might have something that doesn't look like a normal transaction that are completely explainable, but you'll never know unless you ask the questions and get them to explain. And if they give you a really good story and they sign that end use certificate and you ship it, and 3 weeks later you see it in the remains of a drone in Ukraine, at least you'll be able to give them a big pile of information for them to go by on their investigation to find out who is responsible for this. So if you're not going to do it to stop it, at least do it to protect yourself if things go wrong outside of your control.
There's where we can leave it. Well, Don, thanks for joining, and Melissa, thanks for joining today.
Of course.
That's our show. So stay export compliant, everyone.
Produced by Heartcast Media.